The USS Brooklyn, CL-40, was the lead ship in a class of 7 that was the U.S. Navy's first light cruiser since 1903. They were meant to replace the Omaha-class scout cruisers. The Navy had found this class to be too heavy for their hull, which led to structural weakness. The new ships also had to conform to the weight limits of the Washington Naval Treaty. The Washington Naval Treaty meant that the cruisers could not weigh more than 10,000 tons and could not be armed with guns larger than 6 inches in caliber. The Navy also wanted their cruisers to be able to keep up with their battle fleet. The new class of light cruisers were equipped with 5 turrets, each housing 3 guns, with 3 of the turrets towards the front of the ship and 2 of them towards the rear. The 3 turrets at the front of the ship were configured so that the first 2 turrets were super firing. However, the 3rd turret could not be fired when straight ahead of the ship. It would either have to fire to the left or the right of the ship in order to not hit the gun in front of it. Both of the rear guns were in the standard, what is called super firing configuration. And super firing is when you have one gun sitting above the other. Okay, so one gun would normally be above and behind. And this meant that they could fire straight ahead without hitting one another, and which is obviously quite useful. It's kind of frowned upon to hit your own ship when you're using the guns on it. Construction began in March of 1935. She would be launched at the end of November the following year, and finally commissioned in September of 1937. After her shakedown cruise, she was stationed in the Panama Canal until April of 1939. At this time, she returned to New York City to take part in the opening ceremonies of the New York World's Fair of 1939. The next month, she helped with the rescue and salvage of the squalorless SS-192 and rescued the crew and helped to raise the submarine. After this, she was assigned to the Pacific Fleet and took part in the opening ceremonies of the Golden Gate Exposition in 1940. However, her next adventure would prove to be her last peaceful one. In March of 1941, she sailed on a goodwill tour of the South Pacific. Upon the completion of this, she was transferred to the Atlantic Fleet Command. Brooklyn was at port in Bermuda on December 7, 1941, and was immediately sent out to help keep track of the French fleet in the area of Martinique in order to keep tabs on the Vichy French fleet stationed there. In April of 1942, she started protecting convoys that were linking the United States to Europe. On her 3rd trip, one of her charges, the Wakefield, caught fire and had to be abandoned. Brooklyn rescued 1,173 of the troops that had been on board the ship. In November of 1942, the Brooklyn took part in Operation Torch, bombarding shore sites at the Fedhala landing sites. Unfortunately, some of her shells landed on friendly troops of the 7th Infantry while they were assaulting a French-held fort. She later engaged an Agile-class destroyer, the Milan, along with the U.S. heavy cruiser Augusta. During this, she was hit by the Milan's guns, but she did not take significant damage. She went on to damage the French destroyer Brestros and the light cruiser Primagot, both of which were lost due to the damage caused. She was also attacked by a French submarine during this time, but the torpedoes missed. After this, she went back to convoy duty, before giving fire support to the invasion of Sicily in 1943. She remained in the Mediterranean to take part in the landings of Enzio from late January to early February of 1944. On August 15th, the USS Brooklyn took part in Operation Dragoon, where she was part of the naval presence during the invasion of southern France. After this, she would return to the port of New York for refit and overhaul. Once these were completed, she took part in exercises off the east coast of the United States until the end of the war. She was placed in reserve in 1946 and was decommissioned 1 year later in 1947. In 1951, the USS Brooklyn was transferred to the Chilean Navy as part of the Mutual Defense Assistance Program. She was commissioned into their Navy as the B.A.C.H. O'Higgins for one of the country's founding fathers. She served in Chile for 40 years before eventually becoming scrap metal. However, on the way to the shipbreakers in 1992, she sank. One of her 5 turrets is currently preserved at the Chilean naval base at Talcahuano. Also of note, the ironclad Monitor, whose skull is also preserved there and is one of the few remaining ships of that era that is still afloat. I hope you enjoyed this. Please let me know what you thought in the comments. Feel free to like and subscribe. I will be attempting to bring new content on a semi-regular basis.